So I guess maybe that's a good place to get into this withdrawal effort, and just how clumsy and sloppy it's been. Will, you would think that really the goal here for the Biden administration has to be when they decide that we're leaving Afghanistan, make that announcement. The number one goal has to be not to have a fall Saigon moment, right? Like, you
Right.
don't want to see your diplomats being helicoptered out of the embassy as the enemy closes in. Like, that has to be the one thing you want to avoid in all of this. And yet, self-fulfilling prophet, I don't know how, but that's where they ended up. And so this is an unbelievable, some of the sites we've gotten today, of, well, maybe yesterday in Afghan, I don't know all the times and stuff, but where
Right.
on April or August 15th, the day that Kabul falls, we see smoke coming out of the embassy, the U.S. The flag, the American flag coming down over the U.S. Embassy. We see Chinook helicopters, moving hundreds of people out of that embassy. Flights happening rapidly, and so I'll continue to show some of the videos in the background here as you're talking, Will, to get some of the images of what's happening and how just absolutely, I guess, unexpected this must have been for essentially everyone involved here, because it doesn't seem like anybody was really prepared to get all these diplomats out this fast. Not, we talk about the Afghans too who are behind, but and the fact that we're just deploying more troops, it seems like a huge train wreck. So let's talk about this withdrawal effort.
Yeah, man, I think I agree. The term train wreck is a great way to describe this. I mean, they had so much time to think and plan about how they would do this exit, and now they're forced to frantically trying to evacuate diplomatic staff out of the embassy in Kabul there. And I don't think they even made the decision to fully evacuate the embassy until Friday or Saturday. Like before that, they were saying we're going to have some kind of core level of staff there. But I think that really underscores just how little they understood the situation on the ground and how poised the Taliban was to walk right into Kabul there. Because like I think if they had known that, obviously they would have gotten their people out sooner. And so it really does. It I think does highlight just like how clueless and how bad are, like despite the reputed great capabilities of U.S. intelligence, apparently they did not really understand the situation. Um, they are right now frantically trying to get the people out of the embassy. I know one official had told CNN that they think they're going to have everybody out of there by Tuesday at the latest. And so apparently there are quite a few more people to move out. There's still some stuff to do there that
Of the
it's still going to
embassy
take.
or of the country, Will? Because I had read some reports that made it sound like the embassy itself was closed at this point. I'm not sure. Maybe if there's diplomat staff operating out somewhere in the airport, but is the embassy still like controlled and protected by the U.S. and there's still Americans in there?
I'm actually not sure. I think the Tuesday date was out of the country. I'm not 100% sure of like
Okay.
whether there are any staff because I know that the embassy it's not just about evacuating people because the embassy was in addition to being a diplomatic facility, it was also a big like intelligence center. And so there's all kinds of like sensitive documents and computer hard drives. There's all kind of stuff that they have to figure out what to do with there. They kind of learned this lesson the hard way in 1979 in Iran when like a bunch of sensitive stuff was taken by militants in Iran when the hostages were taken. So that's another thing they have to try to figure out there. I'm not totally sure whether that's all been squared away yet, but that's another thing they have to do.
Right. The
Now,
smoke
according to
rising over the embassy today as some of those documents being burned is just one of the, I'm sure, the images that will be kind of perpetually shown to show how big of a calamity this was, Will. That, what I mean, they weren't able to like tape these documents with them, or what I mean, they were just, I guess, having massive fires and burning a huge amount of documents because there's a good amount of fire coming out of the embassy.
Yeah, yeah, that is kind of symbolic. Just like it also, I think, highlights just how unprepared they were. Because had they been more prepared, all that stuff would have been, figured out sooner. But yeah, they had to rapidly do all that, dispose of all this sensitive stuff. Because you don't want, there's some intelligence things you probably don't want falling into the Taliban's hands. Things that give away, I don't know, sources and methods or locations of certain positions, whatever. But now, in terms of the Kabul airport, obviously there's been a lot of chaos today in the city and a lot of people trying to get out. Now, the last I had seen, NATO announced that like all civilian and commercial flights out of the Kabul airport had been canceled, and that they're saying only military flights have been allowed are being allowed. And I believe too, the U.S. military has now actually taken over air traffic control at the airport. I know I'd seen some reports that like there was really poor security there, that a lot of like the people who were supposed to be on detail had fled, the local Afghans, and so there was a lot of really chaotic scenes there at the airport. And it would seem that closing it to all commercial and civilian flights would have added to that confusion and chaos. You know, this like these clips of all these panicked people trying to get to the airport to get the hell out of Kabul. And I guess now a lot of them are going to be turned away, at least for now. I'm honestly not really sure exactly when they would be allowed to leave at this point, or when a lot of these stranded people will be able to get out of there. I know there's some like people, local Afghans who had worked in the embassy and stuff. They're being kind of prioritized, but there are also just a lot of normal Afghans who want to get the hell out of there, and I think they're kind of stuck. Um,
Right.
However, to assist this, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Did you have something?
I was just going to add, Will, I think one group of people that maybe isn't being talked about in Afghanistan is, as the U.S., has tried to, run its propaganda campaign as somehow, we're helping the people of Afghanistan. One of the things that they really did and promoted a lot of is, women in journalism and women getting into all these fields, which
Right.
I'm not like saying that like Afghan women shouldn't be able to be whatever the hell they want to be. Like, obviously,
Right.
that's my position on it. But at the same time, let's say that you went to Afghanistan and you ran a program to train female journalists. Now they may be at heightened risk because of that. And even though they
Right.
maybe didn't work for the US or are in no way entitled to one of these special immigrant visas, nonetheless, they're at risk because of the U.S. occupation and nation building effort. And, the female journalist is just like one easy example to highlight. But I think essentially anybody who worked or benefited off of one of these Western NGOs, which the amount of like resources that the Western countries have poured into Afghanistan over the years, my guess is that there's a lot of people that may be at risk. Now, I mean, I know the Taliban are pointing out that, hey, they're not going to go that route and seek all these reprisals, but I understand why, if I were an Afghan citizen, I sure as hell, they're the government now, I sure as hell don't trust my own government. I damn sure want to trust the Taliban government.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they have tried to give assurances. Like some of the Taliban leadership based in Qatar, I think, have said that, like, we're not totally against women being educated. That was also an issue that came up in the peace talks, whether there would be female negotiators and stuff. And I think they did compromise on that issue a little bit. However, another thing here is that the guys in Qatar might believe one thing, but it kind of matters what the local commander guy on the ground says and thinks. If he decides he wants to carry out some kind of reprisal against a woman, I don't know how much the Taliban leadership would like object to that or punish him for it. So they're still definitely, even though there've been sort of assurances that we're not going to do all these things to women. There might still be some concern there. Now, when it comes to the whole evacuation process for American diplomatic staff and civilians and stuff, the U.S. has now sent, I think, either 5 or 8 or several thousand troops from the Army and the Marines. I'm a little unsure about the exact number, because first they had said 3,000. And then on Saturday, I think they said it would be 5,000. That would be when they finally decided to actually fully clear out the embassy. But I don't know if those are two completely separate deployments or if they just revised the first one from 3 to 5,000. But nonetheless, there are several thousand troops, at least 5,000, at the embassy now, trying to, that were sent to help the evacuation effort.
I
They're probably
have
mostly at the airport now.
I've seen it reported, Will, that there's 6,000 troops, and I think it breaks down to like 3,000 Marines, 2,000 from the 82nd Airborne, and then 1,000 from, I believe it's the Minnesota National Guard, but it's a National Guard unit. And so, at
Wow.
least from my understanding, that's the breakdown of who is in Afghanistan. And this, I guess, could be somewhat fluid, because I'm sure that when they say about 6,000, I mean, that could really mean like 10,000 different troops were in Afghanistan this past week, depending on how they're counting like the flight crews and, who's bringing in the C-17s to load up all these people on. Are they counting the mid-air refueling that's taking place for these planes? All the other air traffic control, maybe like the drone operator. There's a lot of flexibility in those numbers. And so, if there actually are like 10,000 Americans at the Kabul airport or something, it seems kind of possible. But we really don't know, and we're just relying on reporting from the Biden administration. Usually it seems like kind of like, well, the public, they'll say like we're sending an additional 5,000, additional 1,000 troops to Afghanistan. The actual reporting on who's going and how, what numbers from what unit, like the 82nd Airborne, that's coming from unnamed officials. And so it gets kind of a little bit harder to keep track on exactly who's in Afghanistan, what they're doing. Now, John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesperson, says this isn't a military mission, which, I mean, when you deploy 6,000 troops, you're doing a military mission. I mean, that's just by definition kind of situation. But anything else on the withdrawal, Will? What else do we need to cover here?
Yeah, I was just going to say that in addition to the troops who had been sent to help with the evacuation, and they're most of which I think are now at the airport, they did also deploy a couple thousand, I think, to Kuwait and Qatar. I think there were some Air Force guys and some Marines that were sent there. I guess it's just a precaution to just sort of be in the region. And now I have seen some people, like our friends, like anti-war types, pointing to these deployments and kind of suggesting that, oh, maybe this is a sign that, like, they're going to try to keep the war going. But I don't think that's the case. Like, I don't think these few thousand troops could possibly make any difference on the battlefield. And so in that regard, I think Kirby's probably right that this is not primarily a combat mission. Like you would need many more thousands, I think, troops basically need a mini surge to really turn the tide at this point on on the battlefield. So I do think that these couple thousand really are for the evacuation effort. And according to, apparently there was an official that talked to Axios, and they're saying that these troops who had been sent to do all this evacuation stuff, they are supposed to be out of the country by August 31st, which is what the Pentagon was saying previously about all the other U.S. troops as well, that they would get this the withdrawal done early ahead of the 9/11 deadline. And so that is another sign to me that this is just going to be a temporary deployment for the evacuations. This isn't a sign that the war is going to keep going or something.
So there was an interesting statement that came out pretty early this morning, Will, because over the weekend, I think the message from the administration was essentially get to the embassy, get out of the country. From the U.S., and this was also the case for most other Western governments. And then I noticed sometime this morning, at least Mountain Time, so it might have been even around like noon Eastern Time, that the State Department had switched their position and instructed Americans in Kabul to shelter in place. And so I'm not sure if there are Americans in Kabul, how many Americans there are in Kabul, if they're at risk of being taken, like hostage by the Taliban or something like that. There are certainly a lot of Western press in Kabul. Richard Engel, I think, is reporting from Kabul. I'm not sure. Maybe he's at the airport or something like that. But I see the BBC, right. Al Jazeera English, several other outlets, all English outlets, all reporting from Kabul. So I'm not sure what exactly the Taliban are, allowing in terms of, foreign media to continue to report, or if there's a risk of them or people who maybe worked at NGOs, contractors who are like working on some project, maybe not necessarily directly for the Pentagon, their families, question mark if they could get out of the country, stuff like that. And so do we know if there are or how many Americans are still in the country?
I had not seen any specific numbers on that. I did also see the alert telling that, like, the Americans who might be there to shelter in place, but I didn't actually see a number about that. Right. I did notice that, like, in terms of like the foreign media coverage, I was looking on Reuters, like their wire thing, and just to see if there were any photos of, just the Taliban rolling into Kabul. And there was a weird lack of them. Like, it seemed like maybe they had gotten a lot of their reporters out of there. I know oftentimes they'll rely on like local stringers, local Afghans to take those photos. And maybe they just are, preoccupied right now with trying to, them and their own family's safety. But I noticed there was sort of a weird lack of images, at least, coming out of there.
Right. And then on the Afghans who are applying for special immigrant visas and trying to get out of the country, I saw Richard Engel doing a report, which seemed kind of dangerous, where he was like showing all these people who had claimed to work for the Afghan government and now were trying to get out of the country. And it seemed like he was maybe giving, if somebody were looking to carry out reprisals, maybe he was giving somebody a hit list. So that didn't seem like such a great idea to me. But anyways, it seems like there are a lot of Afghans who worked for the U.S. in some role. Everybody likes to focus on the interpreters, and certainly the interpreters are people who work for the U.S. and I don't necessarily want to see them get hung for that. That being said, they were working with the U.S. military, where there were people who were like built the fences around the U.S. bases. They're, people who clean the toilets and cut the food and stuff like that. Those
Right.
Afghans are also being left in. They're worried about their safety and they want to get out of the country too. And so I haven't seen like any numbers on how many Afghans have got to leave, how many more Afghans want to leave. There's certainly a number of Afghans who are being left behind. I'm sure, especially right now with all the flights going out of the Kabul airport, that there's got to be tens of thousands of Afghans in other regions of the country that haven't been able to make it to Kabul, and probably now it's harder to get through Kabul like to the airport since the Taliban control everything. And so with the way the U.S. and maybe we could talk about what our take is on the withdrawal here in a second, but do we know like how many Afghans are leaving, how many are left behind, and where the hell they're all going?
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, about this, and I think that's really driving some of the fear and sort of chaos in Kabul right now. Is people just have no idea what their fate is going to be. I know the Canadian government, they said earlier this or last week, by the time people hear this, I think, they had said they're going to try to help 20,000 Afghans to get out of the country. That seemed to be kind of just like an arbitrary number they chose. They didn't give any kind of timeline for that. They didn't say exactly how that would be done. And given just like the intensity of the recent hours there, like I don't think they're really going to be focused on that too hard. It seems like, they're trying to get their own people out. Canada had sent their own special forces unit to try to evacuate their own embassy. But so there has been some talk about like, what to do with these Afghans, but it seems like they've kind of been like not the main priority for, the Western governments there.
Yeah. I want to say one thing I have a real concern about, that the Biden administration is completely unprepared to take on the number of Afghan refugees that are coming. Do they have beds, clothes, food, places set up for these people? Are they just going to like kind of drop them off in Qatar and let them linger? I mean, I'm sure you saw like the reports, and they're kind of like not a whole lot of details exactly what's happening, but there's definitely concerns about like contractors, I think Filipino contractors who worked for the U.S. in Afghanistan ended up in Dubai, and now they can't get back to the Philippines. They're just stuck. So how many people is this going to have to that are going to be stuck like in various, maybe a couple thousand will be in Turkey, a couple thousand will be in Qatar, a couple thousand will be in the Emirates, and they're just kind of gonna end up stuck there and not really have like a home. And if the refugee visa process doesn't go very quickly, it doesn't seem like the Biden administration is all that concerned about it. I mean, these people could end up languishing in some pretty terrible situations for months or years to come. If there isn't a lot of like scrutiny and emphasis placed on this, that something has to be done. And again, this is just the people that we've so far gotten out. Not to mention that there's a significant number of people in Afghanistan who probably want to leave, who are probably very influenced by and bought into the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan and that government, who are now afraid for their lives. So, Will, I don't know, what were your thoughts on the withdrawal? Because I should just go to this tweet by Dan DePetris, because I think he really nails this way. He says, everybody complaining on Twitter about humiliating and horrible the U.S. withdrawal should direct their inquiries to the Pentagon, which had 18 plus months to prepare an adequate retrograde and evacuation plan. If you just gloss over this, you're playing politics. And I mean, it does seem to me, Will, that there's something really wrong here, that we are completely unprepared for something that should have, had a year and a half of preparation. It almost, in a way, resembles when Trump was trying to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria, and it didn't seem like the Pentagon wanted to play along. In fact, there were U.S. officials in the week leading up to it telling the Kurds that, we're not leaving, and then we end up, announcing we're going to leave. Well, Trump ended up being like stud staying by that tactic where essentially the military just drugged their feet. And so I mean, I'm kind of speculating here, but it really, you have to wonder, Will, if there was a possibility that, maybe the military and the State Department really thought in the end Biden would keep troops in Afghanistan. This in that by them, not, I mean, if we have 20,000 people in Afghanistan, we have to get out. That's a reason to stay. And so that's a way that they could cheat the system and kind of force Biden's hand, or so they thought. And maybe that's where we can now get into what Biden has done, where, again, this withdrawal will has been completely botched, and Biden deserves almost all the blame for that. Some should go to Trump because, I'm if he had maybe been a little bit more firm and organized of a president, well, he probably wouldn't have lost the election, and then then he maybe could have, completed this withdrawal on time in May. But even from that, it was clear, like during his administration, that we didn't seem to be on a path to have everybody out and everything ready by May 1st. And so, maybe some blame belongs there too. But as far as it goes, Will, there was I think a question I asked Danny Surgeon about a month ago, which was, will Biden get steamrolled? And while, we couldn't say yes, Biden's not a man of fortitude. And so there was real questions about that. So what are your thoughts on how kind of Biden has handled this?
Yeah, now in terms of the first part about just like, I think it is very possible. Like this would only make sense. I think it would sort of like explain some of these like this anomaly of them seeming to be completely unprepared. I think you might be right. There might be something to this idea that they thought that they would be able to sort of slow roll this withdrawal, or maybe turn it back and make it not happen. Because it seemed as if they had all this time to prepare and they kind of didn't use it. It seemed like maybe some people in the Pentagon thought that this wouldn't actually be happening and that they wouldn't actually have to do this. But then at some point they realized, crap, we actually have to start scrambling to get this in order. And that was maybe just in the last couple of weeks that they've even been thinking about that.